The big question for hi-fi system sound quality is, do we get what we pay for? I think in the main, yes we do. However, in the streaming DAC sector, there's so much competition, I think it's only natural to question this. And the Cambridge Audio EXN100 that I'm reviewing in this video is a great example because on paper it seems outspecified and outfeatured compared to its more affordable competition. But for sound quality, are we getting what we pay for here? Hi-fi is one of those really weird hobbies where it seems like the more money you spend on a product, the less it seems to do for you. And if you've been into hi-fi for a while, you're probably used to it the same as I am. We're just accustomed to it. But I can imagine if you're an outsider, this would be difficult to comprehend. But for music streaming DACs, I think we have two distinct categories. We have what I call lounge-fi, which is like small, modern, very highly specified or highly featured types of units, maybe like the People's Champion, the WiiM Ultra, or for a bit more money, the Bluesound Node Icon. Whereas the Cambridge Audio EXN100 is the complete opposite. It's taking the old school or traditional approach with a full width chassis, all metal construction and simplicity for the user to a point. And to me, it's the most CD player-like from the three. I think the EXN is a nicely styled hi-fi product that manages to look modern even with a more traditional design, that I think would look very nice sat on either a traditional hi-fi rack or normal TV type furniture, largely thanks to the very nice lunar grey colour that I did my best to try and match today with my shirt colour choice. It has the expected mod con of a 4.7 inch screen that is nice enough, and it gives us a few different VU meter options or a few album art plus text options to look at, but it's not a touchscreen, and why that matters to some people I really don't know. I think more important is that it's not really a large enough screen to see clearly sat at a distance away. Round the back there is an impressive number of connections, allowing it to become more of a media hub for you than just a music streaming DAC, such as a HDMI EARC port for connecting to your TV, as well as several other digital inputs and outputs. There is both single-ended and balanced analog outputs, which I like in practice, but we need to come back to this. I also prefer the all-metal build compared to plastic. I think it can feel more premium. And call me crazy, but I like the fact that there is a proper IEC power input for using a proper power cable. But the EXN is not the heaviest hi-fi product. In fact, some remote controls I've had have felt heavier. But everything feels well built until you tap the lid. Then it does resonate like there's hardly anything inside. Pop in the hood to check to make sure there was something in there. I was greeted with a very nicely laid out and impressive looking circuitry. The EXN is very clearly running on Cambridge's own StreamMagic platform in its 4th generation, and that means wide streaming support and more. There were two main design details that stood out to my non-engineer eyes. Firstly is the power supply being switching based and not toroidal transformer based, as many of Cambridge's price competitors use. It also seems like it uses some of the same power supply that is used in Cambridge's CXN units, which is their more affordable range. The second detail is the DAC and the analog output section that is using an ESS 9028Q2M chip with a custom output stage that does look comprehensive. And you can call me impressed by the amount of CA logos everywhere, showing that this is a fully custom designed product, and I think that is cool. But the reality is there is a lot of empty space inside the casework as a result of having a matching form factor to the EXA100 integrated amplifier that is fully loaded with parts, so needs to be large. That is why I called this an old school or maybe a traditional way, because being larger than the very compact WiiM or Bluesound Node Icon doesn't mean we are getting a unit that is fully loaded with lots more parts, and I think that is important to know. For music streaming support, I liked flicking through the options on the front screen. The EXN is Roon ready. It supports Chromecast, AirPlay 2 and Bluetooth, with direct support for Spotify, Tidal, Qobuz, Deezer and Amazon Music, including all 3 of the Connect services, and I have something interesting to share about Qobuz Connect that might surprise you. The Cambridge Stream Magic app I think is simple and easy to use by design. I think the homepage layout is easy to understand and find what you need, so the app doesn't feel visually overwhelming or cumbersome, with all of the main setup options, such as the screen brightness, being easy to find. Since a recent firmware update, there are now new audio options. One is a 7-band equalizer that could be useful for some, but I did not try it. There is now a room compensation option, which sounds like it could be room correction, but it's not. It's a slider that will automatically apply some equalization to try and help tune the sound to your listening room from extremely lively to a little more furnished. And I did try this just to see what happens. And it's interesting, obviously messing around with the slider, but probably more important to note is that when you engage this option, you will hear a massive reduction in the overall loudness and the volume of the music. And that is because there needs to be a reduction of sound to allow some digital headroom to allow for the equalization to happen. And this is very common. The only downside to this approach is if you want to do a quick A/B comparison, obviously with the volume lower, you have to turn the amplifier up a lot more. So of course, when you turn that off, it's going to be super loud. So it does make doing a quick on-off comparison listening test difficult using this type of system. Navigating the music on Qobuz was easy and simple, with the overall responsiveness of the app being pretty good. One thing I'm not a big fan of is the lists of options. I much prefer it when an app has a fully visual flowing nature to it. Once you get to the album art, everything is good, and again it's fast to navigate and get music playing or cued. And the overall app experience is fine. It's not the best out there, but it's far from the worst by some margin. And I do think if you was new to music streaming, you would pick this app up very quickly. Cambridge EXN costs £1,599. So that is a chunk of money, but it is far from outrageously expensive, I think based on its sound quality, on its performance. But of course, it could seem outrageously expensive compared to a WiiM Ultra, or even maybe compared to a Bluesound Node Icon, because you could buy that plus a full Dirac Live license and still have a fair few pounds in your pocket. So that raises the question, the dilemma of who do I think the EXN is for? And normally it's quite easy to, see a prospective buyer. And this is interesting because it is a dilemma, because I can see many people being really happy with the EXN for a number of reasons. But because the streaming DAC market is so competitive, it feels like a buyer's market to me. And if I was looking to buy one of these in 2025 and beyond, I would be looking for what stands out about it. What incentives has the manufacturer offered me or given me to choose their product over the competition? And the first obvious incentive is the partnering matchup with the EXA100 integrated amplifier, which is my current favourite, integrated under £2,000. And even the big Cambridge remote that the amplifier comes with makes more sense when you have both EX products, as you can control the features of the EXN more like a CD player, and I can see the appeal of that to some. But I think it will be the visual appeal of having the components match on either a rack or on furniture that will be the big draw. But is that enough of an incentive on its own? Maybe for some, but I don't think for everyone. But fair play to Cambridge, they have at least put a better specified DAC section in the EXN compared to what's in the EXA. And that seems maybe silly, but it's not, because a lot of hi-fi manufacturers these days are putting the exact same DAC section across a whole range. And I think that's very confusing, and I'd like to see that stop. But is that enough? Because when we look at the specifications, a product like the Bluesound Node Icon has a newer specified DAC chip in it. In fact, it has two of them. So you might look at that and think, well, the Bluesound's naturally going to have better sound quality. And would either of these two sound better than the WiiM Ultra? This is the whole dilemma, this is the whole situation, and it's what I needed to test. For the sound quality of the Cambridge EXN100, I have had very mixed experiences with it. Back in March, when I first got both Cambridge EX units, I tried them out as a pairing, and straight away the EXA integrated amplifier stood out to me as being very good. But it felt like the EXN was maybe holding it back. So for my EXA review, I ended up using a much more expensive and familiar to me Hi-Fi Rose streamer and DAC setup. Mostly to be sure I was hearing the amplifier at its absolute best, and I think that is very important for a review. So at the time I was comparing the EXN to a much more expensive separate streamer and separate DAC, which was totally unfair, of course, and it was situational rather than on purpose. But in the pursuit of honesty, I have to say at the time there was like a chasm of difference, and that's right and justified by the chasm of price difference. But my second experience with the EXN has been totally different, and it did change my thinking towards it in a positive way. And I'm putting this down to a quite lucky surprise synergy between the EXA100 integrated amplifier and some brand new speakers from Revival Audio that are so brand new they are not even released yet. I have the only demo pair in the world right now, I believe. And these speakers, I think, are going to be pretty special because they are capable of producing a big, full, rich, and so much more. And they responded very well to the EXA that wants to be lively and dynamic and in control of the speakers, delivering a very upbeat and energetic listen. And listening to this setup, I've been enjoying a big scale, smooth and lively music presentation, and it has been impressing me for the total cost. And to get the best sound from the EX pairing, of course, meant using the better quality DAC that's in the EXN. So then had to connect analog to the EXA, either using single-ended or balanced. And I have the exact same ultra high quality cables for both, so I could compare them like for like. And I actually thought the RCA connection sounded quite noticeably, not necessarily better, but just nicer. I think the balance connection maybe sounded a bit clearer, but I also found the music presentation to be just a bit too dry. The RCA was just a nicer, more pleasing overall listen. So maybe that could help you if you decide to go with this pairing. And then something else that I noticed that I really wasn't expecting was I started listening to this system using Qobuz Connect purely for its convenience, and I was enjoying the sound. But then I changed to using the Stream Magic app because I wanted to just experience it and get familiar with using it. And listening to the exact same music streamed from Qobuz, I found to sound slightly clearer when using the Stream Magic app compared to Qobuz Connect. And this is a bit weird and this might trigger a few people, but I tested it a few times and that's what I experienced. Now do remember, I am listening in a very acoustically treated listening room, and that can act like a magnifying glass or a spotlight sometimes on smaller things. And we are talking about a small difference here, but I experienced it, so I decided to use the Stream Magic app from there on. What stood out to me about this system was its big scale and how it was easily filling the room with plenty of gusto type of presentation that was smoothly delivered in the main and always upbeat and lively. And yes, it was not the most articulate or precise or most detailed sound I've had in this room, but I did find myself sitting there for hours listening to it because I was just enjoying, I was just happy with its overall balance. With one new album discovery being Exile by Chronic, which is a new but a very old-timey sounding reggae album. And there's a couple of tracks on that in particular that I really like. One of them is called Saviour, and that has this really like big bass riff that comes in. And it's there throughout the whole track, but it's just there from the beginning. This big, warming, rich, bouncy bass riff. And I love that because of its tactile feeling, how you feel that on your body. And let me tell you, listening to this system, that bass riff was just on its own special enough to make listening to that very simple track actually like a spectacle, like a real experience to sit and listen to. And I think that is what a good hi-fi system should do. That is what listening to music on a good hi-fi system is all about. And that kind of mirrored my whole experience with the EX pairing. Yes, it wasn't perfect in any one area or every area, but it was very enjoyable to listen to. So the first comparison I wanted to do was the ultimate value for money test, swapping out the EXN for the WiiM Ultra, using it as a streamer and DAC. And because the speakers are the same and the amp is the same, and I already knew that synergy was great, I wasn't sure how much sound quality difference there would be. And the reality is the WiiM sounded good too, and the general presentation didn't change that much in terms of scale or the size of the music or the presence in the room, but there were some key differences. The first thing I noticed was the flow of the music. With the Cambridge, the music flowed really nicely, a bit like the ocean, whereas with the WiiM, it was just a bit more mechanical. Maybe the music flow was a bit more chunky in its delivery. And again, we're talking about maybe a subtle difference here, but it was really obvious to me. It was obvious pretty quickly. And yes, I did adapt to the WiiM's different presentation, but I have to be honest, I didn't ever find it quite as relaxing. I wasn't ever quite as engaged in the music as I was listening to the Cambridge. And then the other big difference I noticed was in the bass. Listening to some London Grammar, it wasn't so obvious, but listening to some heavier electronic music from the album Compact Total 25, there's some real heavy bass in some of these tracks, and it was sounding more lumpy from the WiiM. The bass was just not as well defined or as clear as from the Cambridge. And there was also something else I couldn't put my finger on that I didn't find quite as pleasing for the vocals and instruments from the WiiM. I think the sound was just a little more edgy. Now, of course, none of these would be standout criticisms for a unit that costs £349. But when you do compare them, when you do listen to them, these are differences that you notice. So in this instance, or in this situation, maybe you could say you are getting, for sound quality, what you pay for here with the Cambridge. However, my second comparison with the Bluesound Node Icon, I expected to be much closer in terms of sound. But we have to remember the Bluesound has dual mono ESS9039Q2M DAC chips in it. So one would assume higher spec compared to what's in the Cambridge, and at £899 it has the potential to make the Cambridge look very expensive. And I did a lot of comparison listening here over a number of days because I really wanted to be sure. And that is because I was changing my mind through the process about different things. And I've been trying my best to find a best analogy of how to explain the differences between these two. And forgive me for how poor this is going to be. Because for me, the Cambridge is like an abacus. It's big, it's tactile, it's very physical, and it gets the job done in a very kind of tactile, hands-on way. Whereas the Bluesound Node Icon feels more like a calculator. So it gets the job done very quickly, very precise. It's better in a way, actually, but maybe the experience of using it isn't as tactile and isn't as fun. Because in the end, I found these two music streaming DACs to be interchangeable. And that's not because they sounded the same. It was because when I was listening to the Cambridge and then changed to the Bluesound, I straight away missed its lively, upbeat, exuberant delivery of the music. But by the next day, I was appreciating the extra clarity in the soundstage and the better focus to the music notes, even if the presentation was a touch more dry. But then switching back to the Cambridge, I found myself appreciating instantly, actually. It's more like upbeat, lively, and kind of gusto to the music because that definitely makes it more fun and a bit more energized. But I realized that its smoother sound is actually like some smoothing over of the small details of the music. So the presentation is not as clear compared to the Bluesound. It's not as well resolved. It's actually a little mushy or mushier sounding by comparison, but it's not so mushy as to not be enjoyable. And that's where this gets really very difficult, because in one hand you have what you think is technically maybe the best sound, and the other hand you have to consider what people like and what someone's preference might be, which is why I kind of ended up with these being interchangeable as music sources. They do not sound the same, but yeah, you could maybe enjoy either of them for different reasons. But that does throw up the value question, because there is a big price difference here. And from a function point of view, as I mentioned before, you can add Direct Live to the Bluesound and still have money left in your pocket. But the Cambridge has an all-metal build, and I do prefer that, but it does feel very light in your hands, whereas the Bluesound, yes, it's plastic, but it is very solid feeling when you pick it up. So there are a number of non-sound related things that come into the mix when trying to decide value for money, which is always going to be personal. But this does make me question like a whole number of things, like how can both of these products get to like a 5-star review when they're really quite different? But probably more important is, are the speakers, your choice of speakers and your choice of amplifier to drive the speakers and your room and how you set them up in your room and maybe your room's acoustics, are they going to be more important than the differences between maybe the Cambridge and the Bluesound? I'd say probably yes, they probably are going to be bigger. And off the back of that, does it matter then? And that's where I have to say the Cambridge has been a really nice hi-fi product to live with. It's worked flawlessly, it looks nice. I like the way it turns on really fast, it's easy to use and it's easy to live with. But I do have to ask the question, do I think Cambridge have done enough with the EXN? And I don't think they have. And it's interesting because I think they have with the EXA 100. I think that's a really cracking integrated amplifier for the money. Really good, a real standout one. But have they done enough with the EXN? And I don't think they have. And I'm not saying that from any level of arrogance or anything like that. I appreciate how difficult it can be. It's just compared to its peers. And that's the only way that you can judge a product, is compared to its peers. And because the competition is so fierce, like, that's how you have to judge things when you sit here in this seat. And it's tough, but I think manufacturers have to really push. They really have to do a lot to stand out in this super competitive sector of the market. And the great thing about that is it's great for us. It's great for the users of these products. I don't necessarily think that means we're going to get loads more for our money. We probably do get more for our money, but not necessarily loads more. But what it gives us is lots more choice, so that we are able to build our own perfect systems. And none of these products will be absolutely perfect. They're all going to have their pros and their, I won't say cons, but their pros and their weaker points. And that's fine. And it's important to know what they are, because that is how we build and balance a great sounding system. So I hope this review's been helpful. I hope it's been useful. If you've enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel to see more.